Hey there, YouTube. So for this video, I want to cover the S Corporation owner's health insurance expense and deduction. But more specifically, how does it work and what are all the reporting requirements that you need to do? So what goes on the 1120S, the W-2, what do your financial statements look like, and ultimately, how does this end up on your 1040? So I've got a lot of exhibits here. I've got this slide in front of us. With the background information, the fact pattern we're going to look at. And then I've got a number of PDF documents here. So we've got a sample financial statement for an S Corp. We've got an example of what our W-2 is going to look like for the owner of the S Corp that has the health insurance. And then we're also going to look at the Form 1120S reporting for the company and the Schedule K1. And then lastly, we're going to look at the Form 1040 for the taxpayer, right? So the shareholder that's receiving a W-2 income that's going to be reporting their their health insurance premiums paid by the S Corp. So just some general background on how this works. When you have a shareholder in S Corp that owns greater than 2% of the stock, the company can open a health insurance plan for that shareholder as an employee and then pay the premiums on behalf of the shareholder and deduct those premiums at the S Corp level. Okay, so it works very similarly to having an employee that's not an owner and you're paying for that employee's health insurance. Now, what's important here is when you have a greater than 2% shareholder that has health insurance coverage to the company, the plan must be opened as a company plan. Okay, so it's got to be open in the company name, the company EIN. The only exception to that is if the shareholder and the company are living in a state that does not allow that arrangement. So let me look at some examples of what that means. So the fact pattern we're going to be working with here is we have John. He's the sole shareholder of an S Corp, and he wants to deduct the health insurance premiums at the S Corp level. So John currently has a personal health insurance policy in his name as an individual. Right, this was open before he opened his S Corp. So in order to be able to deduct the premiums, he's got to call his insurance carrier and open a new policy in the corporate name, right, under the company name and EIN, and then he insures himself as an employee of that business. Okay, so it cannot be in John's name personally. The policy's got to be with the company. Now, what I mean by unless the shareholder lives in a state that does not allow this arrangement, the insurance is regulated at a state level, right? There are some states that will not allow you to open a company health insurance policy if you only have one employee, and particularly if that employee is an owner of the business, right? You've got to have a lot of employees in some states to be able to open these plans. So if you find yourself in this position, so John here, he's 100% owner of the S Corp. If he lived in a state that did not allow this, he would still be able to deduct the health insurance premiums at the company level, even though the plan isn't in the company name, pursuant to this IRS notice. So the IRS put out a notice where they addressed this issue and they said, okay, look, if you happen to live in one of these states, we'll still allow you to do this, even though you can't open the policy in the company name. Okay, so always check with whatever state you're living and working in, check with your carrier there and make sure that you can do this. If not, then you have to apply the procedures under Notice 2008-1. Okay, so if the policy is set up, you're paying the premiums are a trade or business deduction, right? So they're deducted under Section 162A on the Form 1120S. But what's important here is this is how the reporting mechanism works. If you are paying for the premiums at the company level and they're being deducted, you have to include the value of the premiums in the shareholder's W-2 wages as a taxable fringe benefit. So for example, if John here is on a salary of $20K a year and his health insurance premiums are $5,000, the total wages that's going to be reported on his federal tax return and in his W-2 are going to be $25,000. Okay, and then that's the piece that's deducted on line 7 of Form 1120S. So if I flip really quickly, let's look at the financial statement here first. Okay, so really basic financial statement. John's wages are $20,000. The health insurance premiums that are paid on those wages, or for John rather, $5,000. So when we do his W-2, we have to include $25,000 as the total comp. Okay, so if we look at John's W-2 here, Box 1 is going to have 25,000 in wages, and then 20,000 is reported in boxes 3 and 5, Social Security and Medicare, because the health insurance premiums are not subject to payroll tax. Okay, that's very important, right? So the premiums, again, they're included. Total of 5,000 is included in his box 1 wages, so he's got 25,000 in wages, but you don't report that piece in box 3 and 5 because they're not subject to FICA, right? So you don't pay Social Security, you don't pay Medicare on those pieces. And the Form 941s that are filed throughout the year should reflect that same information. So you report that piece in as total gross wages that are subject to federal income tax, but they are not included in Social Security and Medicare wages. Okay, let me look at this. Okay, so yeah, so we covered that piece. Oh, and just to highlight here, you're supposed to include, so box 14 is where you include other information about the employee. So it's customary to put the $5,000, whatever the health insurance premiums were in box 14, right? So you can put HI for health insurance or something to that effect, and $5,000 amount. Okay, now let's go back to the slide here. Okay, now that's the W-2. So what does the K-1 and the tax return look like? Well, if we look at the tax return, the 1120S, so we have the consulting business here, right? We don't have any book tax adjustments, so it's going to be pretty simple. But you'll notice here on line 7, compensation of officers, it includes both pieces. So we have his actual salary, the $20K he's being paid during the year, and then we include the $5,000 as the health insurance premiums. They are being deducted, but they're just being characterized as compensation for the officers. So, you know, if you have other insurance expense, health insurance expense paid for other employees, you can just put it somewhere down here, and perhaps line 19 have another category for just health insurance expense, right? That's okay to have as insurance expense for your other employees. But when we're talking about compensation of officers, right, so shareholders that own greater than 2% of the company, it has to be included in their line 7 wages. Now, what does the K1 look like? So if we jump down to the K1 for John, so John's K1 here, let me see this. Yeah, okay, so I think you can also include a footnote here to highlight that the health insurance is being included, but I mean, it's just a transmittal letter. So the K1 is more important, right? So if we look at the K1 here, right, we have the net amount of ordinary income or loss from the company, so 183,542. John's the sole shareholder. And then what I like to do, and it's not technically necessary, but I think it's a good idea, is to include a supplementary footnote or other information piece that shows how much of wages include health insurance premiums. So box 17, code AD, $5,000, and then add a footnote here. States health insurance premiums included in shareholder wages, $5,000. Now that's good because it alerts the IRS to the fact that those wages are included, right? So there's K1 reporting, but also the reader of the K1 has more information that they can use to prepare the 1040, right? So if you have a separate tax preparer that's doing the 1040 and not the 1120S, this will help them, you know, be aware that, okay, look, the wages, John's W-2 wages, I can see here in box 14 we have the health insurance being included. And I can see on the K1 that it's included. So I know that, okay, I need to be mindful of taking that self-employed health insurance deduction on the 1040. Okay. So now let's look at the 1040 reporting. So on the 1040, the shareholder is going to enter their K1 just like they normally would and their other items, and they're going to input their W-2. Right, so line 1 of the Form 1040 is going to report the full amount of the gross wages, so $25,000. The K1 is going to report the $183,542, so that's the net ordinary business income. That's going on Schedule E and Schedule 1. And then we're going to report the self-employed health insurance deduction. Okay, so let's look at the 1040. We have John's 1040 here. Note how line 1 has $25,000. So it's the total wages reported on his W-2. $25,000 in gross wages. That's the $20K plus the $5,000 in health insurance premiums. Okay. And if we look at the Schedule E for John, we'll see here that he's got his 183,542. So the S Corp K1 has been entered. That's the amount of non-passive income coming through, which is ultimately again reported on Schedule 1, line 5, and then ultimately flows up to page 1. So there's the ordinary business income. And then here's where the self-employed health insurance deduction comes in. So if you go back to Schedule 1, John reports on line 16 the self-employed health insurance deduction amount of $5,000. Okay, so that's a reduction to his AGI. So mechanically here, what's happening, right? Well, you're reporting it in wages, but you're getting an offset deduction here. So if these 5,000 amounts cancel out, effectively you have 20,000 in wages. That's what he was actually paid. And then you report the net amount of ordinary business income, 183,542, which includes the deduction for the health insurance, right? So the 183,452, we're arriving in that because we're deducting the health insurance premium. So it's kind of a confusing way to report it all. I often get the question, well, are we sure we're actually getting the deduction for it? Yes, you are, right? These two offset, so that's the 20,000 in wages you actually got, and the $5,000 deduction for the health insurance premiums is baked into this number, right? So the 183,542 includes the deduction. So you still get the deduction at the corporate level or the S Corp level. It's just you have to report it this way with the gross up in wages and then the deduction for self-employed health insurance. Okay, so a little confusing. You see it enough, it gets a little more familiar, but these are unfortunately the reporting requirements, right? The IRS has to make everything complicated, and so for health insurance paid for S Corp owners, these are the rules, these are the mechanics and the reporting pieces. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave me a comment below, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next video. Thank you.